The use of psychedelic assisted therapy in the treatment of addiction raises complex challenges regarding alterations of autonomy, and these will require interdisciplinary collaboration to address. In exploring this, we will first examine the intentional agency attributed to substances, as well as agents encountered in psychedelic healing rituals and their potential parasitic influence on individuals' autonomy. We will then examine a paradox within both addiction recovery and psychedelic assisted therapy, that autonomy can be regained by releasing it completely to a higher power. Next, we will examine how shifts to frameworks which emphasize connection may help better unpack these encounters with agents and the role communities play in shaping them. In particular, we will examine how the framework of participatory sense-making can help to address these concerns of alterations in autonomy, as well as the role of community in this alteration. Through this, we will observe how incorporating relational frameworks allows for new collaborative opportunities between clinical and cultural studies. Addiction is often described in terms of a loss of agency, in which one's autonomy is compromised by an external entity which directs their behavior, such as a substance. Intentionality is often attributed to this external entity, as it is described as an agent with its own desires, capable of interfering with one's autonomy. Alcoholics often describe being in an abusive relationship with alcohol. Alcoholics Anonymous's big book calls alcoholics subjects of King Alcohol, and the first of its 12 steps implies a loss of autonomy by claiming that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Similar pattern appears in various psychedelic practices. For example, 74% of participants in Harrison Gurel's study described ayahuasca as an intentional agent which guides them during the experience. This can also be seen in the conception of a plant teacher by the mestizo shamans of northeastern Peru. Here, plant teachers intentionally share or withhold knowledge about plant medicine and other healing activities from individuals wishing to learn. Psychedelic substances taken by individuals may also lead to encounters with intentional agents. This was observed in Dupuy's 2022 study, where malicious agents were identified as demons within mestizo ayahuasca ceremonies at the Taquiwasa Center for Addiction Recovery in Peru. Participants described these demons as having a parasitic relationship to their autonomy, paralleling the aforementioned description of agents in other addiction narratives. Autonomy is then regained from these demons via ritual exorcism during the ayahuasca ceremony, utilizing prayers and main figures from the Catholic pantheon. Set and setting play a crucial role in shaping the perception of these external entities, as people and their practices are inextricably influenced by the cultural frameworks in which they are embedded. In other words, one's sense of the agents they encounter is made participatorily. Resources for understanding external entities are abundant in religious material and are heavily utilized in the description of agents in both psychedelic experiences and addiction recovery. Collaboration with religious studies scholars will then be crucial for understanding how addiction recovery and psychedelic practice frameworks engage these external entities. The treatment of addiction through psychedelic assisted therapy presents further questions regarding agency and autonomy. 12-step programs like AA are one of the most widely recognized discourses on addiction recovery. Step 3 frames the surrender of one's sense of autonomy to a higher power as a necessary step in restoring it. One admits they lack autonomy, surrenders to a higher power, and this facilitates the regaining of autonomy. A striking paradox emerges here. While addiction is framed as an involuntary loss of autonomy to an external agent, this asserts that it is only through voluntarily surrendering one's autonomy to a higher power that one can regain it fully. A comparable pattern can be observed in the treatment of addiction through psychedelic assisted therapy. Various clinical studies have found a significant correlation between experiences of ego dissolution and drastic improvements in addiction recovery rates. Ego dissolution is described as a temporary collapse in the sense of self on which one's sense of agency and autonomy rests. This experience is often framed in ways which mirror AA's Step 3, seen in descriptions of one's sense of self being dissolved into and connected with some higher power, such as nature or God. Here, we find the same paradox. The dissolution of an agent's sense of autonomy enables the recovery of that very same autonomy. These parallels point toward the potential of using existing addiction recovery models in conjunction with psychedelic assisted therapy. However, one's conception of a higher power is shaped by their embeddedness in wider cultural frameworks. Therefore, the role of higher powers, being shaped by the setting of wider religious discourse, further underscores the need for collaboration with religious studies scholars. Ego dissolution might not adequately capture the subtlety of these concerns. New approaches to psychedelic experience, such as the Watts connectedness scale, offer greater nuance. Rather than conceptualizing these experiences as a binary between ego presence and absorption into a higher power, Watts views it through a multidimensional lens of connectedness. He identifies three forms of connectedness: to self, to others, and to the world. This focus on connections follows similar calls in addiction literature to frame recovery and addiction as a relational process. This is significant, as it helps broaden the concerns of psychedelic assisted therapy to include another key component or key element found in addiction recovery: community. In 12 step programs, recovering addicts find support through a ritually structured community of others seeking the same goal of regaining autonomy. Through communal connectedness, one is better supported in the process of surrendering to a higher power and overcoming their addiction. Ayahuasca group rituals have also been suggested as benefiting from similar sociotherapeutic mechanisms. By incorporating new connection oriented frameworks, researchers can better understand the relationship between connection to others, communities, and higher powers. Enactive cognition is another framework which takes connection as its starting point. Enactive theories have been suggested as a means to more effectively address relational connection in both addiction recovery and psychedelic studies. Melling and Scheidinger claim that benefit of viewing psychedelic experiences through an enactivist framework is that it, quote, acknowledges both their observer relativity and context dependency through emphasizing the mutual dependency of the world and the mind. End quote. Let us explore how enactivism achieves this. In enactive theories of cognition, autonomous agents are viewed as constantly constructing themselves, and through this making themselves distinct from the environment. This could be in a biological sense, like metabolism, which supports the body, which distinguishes one from the environment, or cognitive, such as the construction of a narrative identity. This self construction process, called adaptive autonomy, implies a dynamic regulation of the couplings between agent and environment, as both the agent and environment are constantly changing. Norms arise and shift as a result of how these changes threaten or sustain one's dynamic self maintenance. For example, the biological norm of body temperature sustains metabolism, or the social norm of traffic laws sustains the safety of transit. Yet, in the case of the threat of illness, both ambulances and fevers alike show that these norms are adaptive to circumstance. The norms of this active self construction create a meaning making process saturated with affect, casting a web of significance onto the world. This adaptive process of navigating meanings in the world through the construction and shifting of norms is called sense making. For example, The sense of the deliciousness of food emerges primarily from the evolved norms of sustaining metabolism. Or the panicked sense of braking at an unseen red light emerges from one's attunement to the social traffic laws. When two or more agents coordinate their actions and utterances, their acts of sense making can become coordinated such that new social domains of sense making arise. This is called participatory sense making, a framework developed by cognitive scientists Hanna de Jager and Ezekiel de Paulo. Through this participatory process, one's autonomy both shapes and is shaped by the autonomy of the other. For example, our act of coming together here and speaking allows the participatory act of a conference, where we both shape and are shaped by each other's ideas. Individuals are framed such that the interaction directs participants without a direct center of control. The whole of the interaction is greater than the sum of its parts. This gives participation in the interaction a kind of emergent autonomy, which also shapes and is shaped by its participants. For example, the drugs and religion unit, which we're presenting at here, has its own autonomy in terms of its topics, which is both shaped by us and also shapes the topics which we bring to the discussion. In short, we can think of participatory sense making as a multi agent form of adaptive autonomy. This participation can exist to varying degrees. For example, orientation is a unidirectional form of participation, where one partner guides the attention and affect of another, such as a conference talk. Another form of participation would be joint sense making, which is a shared activity where meanings are stabilized collectively, such as a roundtable discussion. So then how might we apply this framework of participatory sense making to our present concerns? An active cognition helps to provide a connection oriented framework by shifting focus to relationality and viewing autonomy as an adaptive coupling with one's environment. The framing of interacting agents within participatory sense making also helps provide a framework to explore the autonomy altering encounters with intentional agents found in addiction narratives. For example, the attentional guidance of an addictive substance could be viewed as a maladaptive form of orienting participation. One's environmental coupling would then be adapted via experience of deep connectedness to a community or higher power. This would facilitate the reorienting of relations such that the person exercises greater personal autonomy in their interaction with the substance. This view shifts focus to active connections as opposed to viewing recovery as only the gaining of a personal quality of greater autonomy. Participatory sense making further helps to address how communities participatorily interact with intentional agents, as it is a framework which both describes agent interaction and gives group participation a form of autonomy. Through this collective autonomy, the intentional activity of individuals can lead to the formation of a collective intentionality, allowing the community to function as a reorienting entity. Through participation in this group, individuals' recovery efforts are both strengthened and are strengthened by the other individuals as well as the group as a whole. Therefore, in understanding these communities as autonomous collectives of sense making, which participatorily interact with agents, participatory sense making provides a framework to explore their collective ritual activities, and in this, their communal reorienting of individuals' autonomy. Participatory sense making can likewise aid in the exploration of the ritual communities previously discussed by understanding them as a form of joint sense making. Through participation in the group interaction, collective sense is made. This not only applies to individuals within the group, but also to the group's interaction with sense making practices in the wider community. Being adaptable to various scales of individual and group interaction, Participatory sense-making aids in considerations of how the wider setting of cultural sense-making practices, like religion, may play a role in contextualizing these agents and encounters. Being a cognitive framework, participatory sense-making is more easily integrated into clinical research. Yet, despite emerging from cognitive science, the joint sense-making it describes is largely the domain of the humanities, it being a cultural practice. Therefore, the framework of participatory sense-making assists especially in connecting clinical and cultural studies, encouraging collaboration between them. As we have seen, both psychedelic experiences and addiction recovery often involve encounters with intentional agents that shape one's autonomy. Connection to both higher powers and community may reshape this relation and help restore autonomy. New connection oriented paradigms, like participatory sense making, may be useful to unpack this via viewing them through a multi agent interactional framework. Yet, the puzzling quality of these encounters and their attribution of agency inevitably raises more questions than answers. Therefore, ongoing conversations between scientists, clinicians, and scholars in the humanities will be vital for unpacking these complexities. From this, psychedelic assisted therapies may be developed which more effectively integrate both social and spiritual connectedness as a significant component of recovery. Religious studies scholars, with their wide expertise in ritualistic communities from AA to Santo Daime, will be crucial for developing effective treatment approaches that bridge existing addiction recovery and psychedelic frameworks in a way that is both scientifically and culturally attuned. Therefore, just as the boundaries between agents may be ambiguous in both addiction recovery and psychedelic assisted therapy, so too must the boundaries between academic disciplines become more porous in order to explore the intricacies of these enigmatic, altered states of autonomy. Thank you.